Okay, and moving right along with assembly 3 here, it looks like we're going to be pulling out all of these little blocks and frame stiffeners, multifunctional. The bearings are all probably pre-installed. We'll make sure that these are tight enough to hold things in place. It looks like all of that stuff is coming out of the second bag here on the lower part of that, all of these little bearing blocks here. So we'll pull these guys out and we'll make sure that we've got an inventory of all these parts that we need, and then we'll show those and put it together here, try to find the pinion and all that stuff that we need. And looks like we might also be mounting the motor at this point. Okay, now to do inventory here on assembly 3, we pulled all of these bearing blocks here out of this little case. Here, looks like there was some hardware in here, I believe. The guy here, the two little ones here, and then the one here. Got this little one, which is this one down here, and bearings pre-installed. That's all ready to go. We've got this one, which is this kind of odd shaped one, has these little holes on the other side. Bearing is pre-installed on that one as well. We also have the motor mount, this one. It's got some different orientations for holding screws for the motors, and it was kind of confusing in this picture. You may think that these two are separate ones. These two are the same one. We're going to put the motor on it. We're running a Scorpion 4525 520 kV Ultimate. Put that on there. So that's that part. No bearings for that one. And then these guys up here, bearings are put in there, but the button head screws are not installed. So there's a little hardware bag here that has the button head screws. Make sure you measure out. They're the 3x6mm with the calipers. Use blue thread lock and use them on the side where the bearings are installed. So right here and here. And we're going to do that on both of those. There's also some other hardware here. You'll find some screws for mounting the motors. You've got some 4mm and some 3mm diameter. They're all 8mm long. Depending on the motor that you're using, you might use 3 or 4. And then some other frame hardware in here. So we're going to get this stuff all separated out. We're going to put these button head screws in here, and we're going to get the motor mounted, and we'll come show you what those look like when they're ready to go, and then we'll start putting them together into the frame. Okay, now that we've pulled some of this stuff out, we've got our motor, Scorpion 4525 520. We're going to use these bigger 4mm screws to mount it, and it looks like it's going to line up the holes with these outer 4, the bigger ones. We've got the button head screws now installed on these guys with blue thread lock. Don't use too much, you don't want it to get out of there and gum up the bearings. Of course, if a little gets on the outer part, probably won't hurt anything, but if you get in between the two bearings, then you're probably going to have problems. And one thing that you might be searching for, the pinion, you won't find it here in any of these boxes at all. Of course, it is in the same bag here with the main gear, so rip that open, and then you've got the pinion here, and it also has those grub screws. So that part you might need for setting this part up for mounting the motor on the motor mount. So now we're just going to mount the motor here on the motor mount, get that set up, put the pinion on it, and these parts will be all ready to go, and we will be able to move on here to, it says assembly 3, 4, 5, so kind of a 3-parter. We'll put all this hardware onto one side of the frame, build one side of the frame at a time. Actually looks here like it might be worthwhile to mount the motor later on so it's not putting all of the weight and strain on it while I'm building it, and then just put it on before I put the second side of the frame on. That might be possible. Or, you know, this could just be the last part that I add. Okay, now moving on here to this assembly, assembly 345. We're going to have to pull the frames out of that big bag. You'll find there's a couple other things, set those aside. In that bag you'll also find this little thing of carbon fiber. These are going to be the servo ends to hold those on, but what we're going to use in this step is these little guys that hold the canopy mounts. And the two flange bearings are actually not installed on this one, so we have to install those. So make sure you have some CA. Let's see here. Yeah, so I've got some CA here ready to go to put those in. Now first we're going to make sure we've got the right side of the frame. So there are actually two different sides of the frame. If you put them right over each other, you can tell the differences. Right here, there's one where the square is on the inside and one where the square is on the outside. And also down here you can see that there's the servo mount on one of them, and then one of them also just instead has these two holes. So looks like we're looking for the one with the two holes and the square towards the inside, so that's this one right here. So we're just going to line it up so it's just like this. Like it says here, use CA or glue to epoxy, or some sort of epoxy to glue the bearing from the inside, so it looks like it's coming in here from the inside. This part is just an exploded view of this little section right here. It's not its own piece. There are some other pieces that will go on the frame, but this is not a separate one, it's just that. So we're going to put the flange bearing in there, and it looks like we're going to use all of these support bearings as well. Put those in the orders as recommended here. There's this little thing right here. I think these are actually back in one of these bags. I think it's this bag here, or this box of stuff. Yeah, so we've got some hardware here, and there's some hardware in there. I've put all mine here into a little tray that I've got. We're going to separate them, get all the grease off the ends of the threads, separate them by size. Again, as always, we're going to use the calipers to measure the length of those, and again, just make sure we're following everything carefully in here. We're using blue thread lock on all of these, but we'll have, like here in this breakaway tab, there's a bigger hole, a smaller hole. The smaller hole lines up here with a 6mm screw that screws that in, and then this side we're going to use a 3x8mm for these three, which go into all of these holes up here, and then these are also 3x8 that we use for the rest of the frame to go and hold in all of these other mounts and bearing blocks and everything. So once we put that together, we'll give you a nice closer look at the finished product of this step. Just again, make sure you pay attention to the right sizes and use the thread lock. Also, with frames, I'm going to have to go and grab my sandpaper. Do the edges, just sand the edges around here, get rid of the flashing. You might even have to do a little bit here for where the flange bearing is, because these can cut your wires when you're running your wires around. And carbon fiber doesn't feel too good when it cuts, and it also conducts. So make sure you clean that up on everything, every piece of carbon fiber that is in this kit. So you've got this, our bearing blocks, our hardware, and the flange bearings somewhere here. I'm going to get those installed, and we'll take a look at that here when it's done. Okay, now that we have this part finished up, I'm going to show you what we've got here. There are mostly 8mm screws throughout here. 8mm here, 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 and on these two. Those are all 8mm. 10mm with the thinner washer. It's a 0.8mm. There's also a 1mm washer, and that is used here on the motor mount. with the other two 10mm. So there's the 10mm screws are going to be here and on the front of this part. So this is going to be lined up with this motor mount. You don't want these too tight. See how there's little slits here and there's slits here, and then there's also on this bottom motor mount there's slits down there, and these are 8mm, and there's also this little shield in front of it. So instead of using these washers in these cases, of course there's this thin one up here, but there's no special washer being used here because this acts as a washer, and down here these act as washers as well. We're going to use these nice fancy washers here for most of these other ones. See, they've got little indents, and that goes about halfway into the frame, and then the bearing blocks have little indents that come out and they go in the other half of the frame and they lock up pretty tight. Right here with this guy where we have the canopy pin top, we use the long one. Those are in their own little bag, and the screws, the little 6mm pin top screws that hold those in place are in the same bag, and I think they were right here in that little foam casing right there. And we're going to make sure with this 8mm we're going to go through the washer, and then we're going to go through this mount, this canopy pin mount right there, and the other end of the screw you can see is going to go lined up with this hole. So make sure you don't just screw that top bearing block in there with just this. You're going to have to back it out and go back through here so that you hold the canopy mount pin right there. So this side we've got all these bearing blocks. Again, this one's moving freely. This one right here with the part of the bearing, the open end, facing down, because I think the main gear is going to be pushing up on that. And then here on these two blocks, these identical ones, make sure that the screws that are holding the bearings in place are on the top. And of course we've got this flange bearing that we used some CA to push that in from the inside. So if you line that up, this is the front, this is going to be the back of the helicopter. We've got this side finished up, and now we're going to move on to this side, which basically we take the same stuff, pull the shorter pins for the canopies right here, put those in, and then there's also in this part all of these spacers. So we're going to pull those out and we're going to screw those on as described in here. And it looks like there's also some of these servo mounts that it asked to put on. So we're going to find these servo mounts as well and put those on this side of the frame. And again, as always, use blue thread lock and make sure you measure the sizes. These are all 3x8, mostly like what we used on these front mounts. This little one, this Phillips head special screw, it looks like, is used to hold these servo mounts to the frame. They're probably going to be in a bag of hardware that are with those. So those little things are going to hold those in place, and then we'll be able to put the servos and then screw those in right to these guys, which it looks like they also have little indents that will go into the frame. So we're going to get this part done and then kind of show you what that looks like afterwards. Okay, here we go now after finishing this part of assembly 3, 4, and 5 of the frame systems. What we did was added these spacers to this hole, and then also down here through the bottom canopy pin, and then we also added the servo mount. So I'll show you here what the finished product looks like from the side that it looks like in the instructions. Here we've got this guy up here, and then we've got the smaller, like up here we have the longer one, shorter one right here. same sort of setup through the 8mm, and then it goes into this spacer right here. And then we've got the servo mounts right here. What I had to do was, I'll show you this guy just for an example. See how they have these little indents? Well, when I was trying to go into the frame, I'll show you on this other half, it didn't go into the frame very well. I had to, see, I couldn't even just push it in there. So what I did was I took a knife and then just kind of twisted it around inside of here to make sure it was big enough so that these could go through. It didn't really take too much, you just got to clean some of that off, but it really won't go in by itself, and it's supposed to go into those holes. So just do that here on the inside, take a little knife, go around there, push those in to make sure that they're flush against the frame. And then there's this little screw that comes with this bag of hardware that's included with these in here. And just be careful not to lose those little screws. And you're going to need a really small Phillips head screwdriver to hold those in place. Once you put the servos in, it'll hold against the frame even better. So you don't need to over tighten those, but use a little blue thread lock and get them pretty tight in there. So that's the finished product after this step. Got all this stuff moving nice and smooth here. These are all set. This still moves smooth. We've got our canopy mounts in on this half of the frame, and we're ready to move on and see what we have next. So it looks like what assembly 4 and 5. Looks like we're going to put together all these tray spacers and some of these really long screws. Looks like 3 by 28mm screws. Some other hardware. We're going to go find this. Oh, okay. So there's the battery tray. It looks like it goes in between the frames. There's this outer piece of the frame here, which we're going to pull out, and then this other carbon fiber piece that came. It's a battery tray, which will go in the middle. So we'll pull those parts out, tell you where they came from, put it together, and show you the product there, and move on to this assembly. Okay, now we've got all the pieces together for this part of the assembly. We pulled out of this part of the tray, I think it was in here, all of this hardware, all these little spacers. There's some longer ones and some shorter ones. We'll show you where those go. Also some more of this hardware, some really long screws, 28mm, and then there's also these. These are going to go on the bottom of the frames, and then also some more long screws. So this is the hardware we're going to be using for this step. We've got one of these battery trays. Both of them are identical, so it doesn't really matter which one you use. And then there's also this part of the frame, which is going to be lining up right here. So these two frame parts, this hardware, and what we're going to be doing with them is taking all of these long screws, going through the washers here in most cases, except for these two, where we're going through these metal landing gear mounts right here. So we're going to go through this part, which will line up with the frame, and these holes, you can tell, see how this slot right here will end up lining up with that front canopy mount. And we're going to be going through that. Looks like first through longer spacers, and then through the carbon fiber battery tray, and then through the shorter spacers. And looks like they might be screwing into the shorter spacers. Let's see what they do. Use blue thread lock on these. Pretty simple. There's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they'll line up with these holes on the frame here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then these two. Again, make sure that you're using these little metal landing skid mounts. So we're going to pull all this hardware out. We're going to do that. Follow this part of the instructions. Almost done with this half of the frame, and we'll show you how this looks when it's all done. Okay, here we go now that we've got the battery tray installed here, just like it says in the manual, and we went through longer ones here. There is an indent in these little spacers. Make sure the indented part goes towards the frame, not the battery tray, because it's going to go inside there. The holes here in the tray are too small for it to go in there, so make sure you've got that right. And you may even want to, make sure you sand this hole or stick a knife in there and twist it around to make sure this will go in there. The longer ones, there's some 25, let's see what does it say on the manual here, 25 millimeter and also some 28 millimeter. You can tell the 25 are shorter, and then there's also a little space here that's not threaded, where the 28 are threaded all the way through. And you're going to use the 28 millimeter basically everywhere that it also has this external part of the frame. So these two up at the top where it doesn't have that extra thickness of this frame, or the landing skid mount, is where you're going to use the 25 millimeter. So here and here, 25 millimeter, and then 28 millimeter all the way through. So you're going to go through here, the landing gear mount, and then it will go through the carbon fiber, and then in through long spacer, and then it screws here into this smaller spacer. On the other side of the frame there's going to be another battery mount, and those will end up screwing into these as well. So here's the finished product of that step. Take a good close look at it. So that'll be pretty nice. The battery's going to go in here, and we strap it in, and that holds on pretty tight, nice and solid. So it looks like that is the end of assembly 4 and 5 here. Now we will come to the A-arm and bell cranks. So we're going to see what we've got here. I'm guessing again we've probably got bearings pre-installed, and we probably just have to put the linkage balls here. Looks like there's going to be some short ones, some longer ones. Probably have to install this and the control rod. But I'm guessing the other stuff is all set. So we'll pull that stuff out, we'll get the hardware together, show you what we need, and then put it together and show you the finished product. On to this next part. Okay, now I've finished up this assembly 5-9 with the arms and the bell cranks. Pretty simple. Just make sure you put everything on the correct sides. You can see where like this sticks out. There's actually only one side you can put it on this arm, so make sure it's the part that sticks out. Opposite end is where you put the other ones, and they're on the outer holes right here. Same with this one. Here's the finished product. Both of these will have the ball link out here, and then out here. This one looks like this. There's little grub screws that come with the hardware for this one. Don't lose those. I've got those in a little side bag right here. We'll be using those probably with one of these indents. Also, we've got this A-arm for the elevator crank, elevator arm. Put the ball link end on here first with the 10mm screw that came in the same bag, same hardware, and then we have some 8mm screwing into these nice and tight with some blue thread lock. We're going to line these up, the side with the two indents. The inner indents are going to line up with the holes here, and then we use the little 5mm screws with blue thread lock to hold those in place and get those nice and tight. So this is still free moving, and the rest of it right here is static. That won't move, and that's the end of this assembly. We're just going to put these to the side, get some more stuff done here. So it looks like the boom mount we're going to get ready next, and then we're going to put all of this stuff onto the side of the frame that we've built for assembly 6. So now we're going to get all the hardware together for this. We'll show you that, and then put it together. Looks like something, there's probably a lot of that that's pre-assembled as well. So we'll take a look at that and come back and then put it all together.